What if the heaviness you feel after sessions isn't just part of the job, but a sign your system is absorbing more than it can hold?
Today on Mastering Change, palliative care doctor Rosie Weir shares what she's learned about being exposed to other people's trauma and how practitioners can stay present without being overwhelmed by it.
Therapists and healers feeling stretched thin, Rosie offers a grounded way forward. Trauma stewardship, slowing down and cultivating well-being through a deeper connection with yourself, with practical examples of how to actually do that.
Let's hear from Dr. Rosie Weir.
Dr. Rosie Weir, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's delightful to be here.
Great stuff.
Hi, Rosie. Welcome. As most of our podcast listeners now know, we start off every podcast with a little card game. I've got a selection of cards. And on each card is a prompt, and the idea being that the prompt will encourage you to tell a sort of story for our listeners to help us connect to you and for you to connect to them. So I shall pick out the first card and read it to you, which says, I've never shared the whole story about the time ...
Ooh, wow. Goodness me, that's a big one, isn't it? You could go anywhere with that. No, and the first time to share it is on a podcast. So let's have a think. I think to keep it relevant, I would say I've never shared the whole story about my first experience in dealing with someone who was actively dying in hospital. Whenever I was, tender age of 25, and thrown into my first hospital jobs. And although during university, I'd done palliative care placements, but they were very curated, I suppose, and in hospice environment. And yeah, it was very different coming onto the wards. And one of the nurses coming up to me and saying, like, could you go and review Mrs. A in the side room, like she really isn't looking well. And I remember, those feelings of like being a new doctor and oh goodness, right, going through my head, ABCD, which is like our kind of emergency, way to assess somebody who's very unwell. But going into the room and suddenly realizing intuitively that that wasn't going to be appropriate in this case, and that this lady was clearly dying, and really not having much of like an idea what to do in that scenario. And there were family there, I recall, and going to my seniors, and they were very busy. And they said, oh, just bring the palliative care team, and did that. And thankfully, it was a very small hospital, and one of the palliative care nurses was there really quickly. And she came in and assessed the lady with me. And afterwards, we came out and we made a plan together. I mean, mostly she made the plan and I prescribed, which is kind of a strange scenario whenever you're a new doctor, when you're not really knowing exactly what to do. And someone's just telling you get very used to that. But yeah, I remember just this feeling of calm defending, and that she knew what to do. She knew how to talk to the family. She knew how to talk to the patient, to bring together a plan that was going to get this lady more settled. She was very breathless. She was dying of heart failure, I remember. And yeah, I think that that single scenario, before I had graduated, I thought I maybe wanted to do GP work, but that is, I guess, me sharing the story of like why I wanted to become a palliative care doctor, because to me it was like magic. And the lady thankfully became much more settled. Her symptoms were much better controlled, and she passed away peacefully a few days later. And so the power of that scenario just really landed with me, and that kind of set me on my path to be like, oh, GP, cheerio, no, none of that for me. Palliative medicine is the way to go. So yeah, that is a story that actually I haven't shared with anybody so far. When everyone asks me, why am I a palliative care doctor? I'll say, oh, my first jobs, I was so impressed by the palliative care team, and that's, why I wanted to do it. But I suppose that was the actual clinical scenario, and that was the moment. So, yeah,
It's so
that's the answer
interesting
to
to
that
hear.
question.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about palliative
Mm,
care in that
mm,
way, because
mm,
I have known medics in training and doctors in
mhm.
long-term practice who actively avoid death. In fact, it's the
100%. Yeah.
antithesis of their
Mm,
reason to be in the field. And it's
mhm,
one of those
mhm,
huge taboos that,
mhm,
it
mhm,
affects everyone. And yet,
mhm,
most people abstractly reject that. So,
mhm,
about you,
mhm.
is one very
Yeah.
comfort. I found some immediate
Mm,
comfort in the way you described it because it takes
mm,
some of the fear,
yeah.
but
Mm,
also that it is somewhat controllable
yeah.
in a
Yeah. There's
time where
huge
you're not.
capacity to help.
Oh, mm,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In this great mystery of this huge transition, that we're all going to meet, and personally and with our loved ones, there is a huge amount of uncertainty and unknownness within that. But there are ways, that there's obviously, like with birth, there's a pattern and there are stages, and okay, not all of them go this certain way, but the majority, will follow a certain pattern. And I think we have become very, like our Western culture, the denial of death has, reached real epidemic proportion. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of my job is explaining to family and patients, the process of death and dying, and what to expect, because it's like a relief. You can just see them kind of exhaling. And to the best of my knowledge, nobody knows exactly how these things are going to go, but there is pattern and there is generally, a certain path. And it is, I think, for most people, and for me even, whenever I started to witness it and talk to people about it, it was like, okay, this isn't actually something to be feared, and it's actually, a time that can be imbued with so much significance and meaning. And it can be a really beautiful time, just like birth. I feel like, in the last kind of 50 years, birth has come a long way. And I think like death needs that kind of rebranding. And there's lots of people like, Catherine Mannix and Rachel Clark. There's people that are coming into the kind of the main public sphere that are talking about death and dying. There's some amazing books out there. But we just need to get a little bit better at becoming familiar with it, and and tapping into the wisdom that exists, not even in modern Western culture, but there's so much there from all the spiritual traditions. And yeah, there's Buddhism especially. um there's huge wisdom there that can be so helpful to us now, I feel.
The work that you've been doing, what is that wisdom that you're drawing on and pulling into your work then?
So I think I was lucky enough to do an amazing course a year and a half ago now, and it was in a Buddhist retreat center in West Cork, and it was called the Authentic Presence Immersion: How to Be Authentically Present for Those at the End of Life. And I thought I was going to go, and I've been practicing palliative medicine exclusively now for about 7 years, but I thought was going to be told, what to say and what to do. But actually it was all about getting to know ourselves and connecting with ourselves and becoming, cultivating that capacity of presence through meditation and through certain reflections, so that then you can be authentically present with the families of those that are dying, with those that are dying. So that is like, it's there, and it's not like it's taught. I haven't been particularly trained in those simple principles of like getting to know oneself and the capacity to cultivate presence in a relationship with someone who's dying. But it is, yeah, totally transformative, you know. But the thing that people ask me again and again whenever I talk about my job is, oh gosh, that's that's how do you do that job? That sounds that sounds horrendous, like, oh, it must take a very special person, the amount of times that I've heard that. And even from other medical colleagues, like, oh, I could never do palliative care. And that's, what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. And what is like my passion is there's so much knowledge about how we mind ourselves in this kind of interaction, like within healthcare, not just within healthcare, but how we become stewards of suffering and other people's trauma. And it is trauma. I mean, the number of losses that a dying person is facing, in terms of their identity, financial loss, family loss, the ending of this current cycle, this transition at the end of life, that is deeply impactful, like to a greater or lesser degree, depending on many factors. But for us to be able to do our work sustainably and in a way that brings us joy and is life affirming both for us and those that we work with, we need to know how to like process what we're dealing with. And I like at the conference in September, there were some amazing talks about burnout, about the ethics of self-care that I went to, but I didn't go to any that really touched on, and maybe they were there and I just didn't attend them, but how we deal with the work that we do, and not just within palliative medicine or medicine, but as therapists and people who professionals that are being like constantly exposed to the suffering of others and this trauma of others, how we can navigate that in a way that doesn't lead us to become totally burnt out. Because it is, I mean, this is in my analogy, I've read about it and I've heard about it where people talk about like a painter going to work and getting splattered with paint and his work clothes are covered, and he comes home and or she and realizes that they're covered in 10 different colors of paint. And when we're heading into like clinical scenarios, as therapists or as doctors or nurses or whatever, we're being exposed to that suffering of others. And if we don't find a way to like clean ourselves off and shower and metabolize that suffering and that trauma, we're going to be impacted by it. And that's not an uncommon scenario where people are taking time off because of burnout, high levels of stress, manifesting as physical disease even. And yeah, I think that there is a lot of wisdom out there that we can draw on in order to navigate this work essentially. And yeah, become it's again not my concept. Laura Litsky wrote this amazing book, Trauma Stewardship: How to Care for Ourselves so we can care for others. And it totally changed my life when I found it. It was about 4 years ago now. And
so what do you do, Rosie?
Yeah.
How do you do to navigate that?
Yeah, so I mean, I have certain practices that I draw on, meditation, journaling. Yin yoga is a huge one. I did my yoga teacher training 6 years ago now, and did my yin yoga teacher training 3 years ago. And those practices like give me a huge amount of capacity. And whenever I'm not saying the work is easy, because things do build up, but to have the daily practices, the weekly practices that bring me back into myself and how I'm feeling, and help me gauge how things are, and then respond to that from a space of just like especially in yoga, like its capacity to regulate the nervous system is like nothing I've experienced. I've tried lots of breath work practices, and deep meditations, and it's incredible for that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think yoga in general, but that
Mm.
ability to work on the fascia in yin,
Yes.
and the
Yes.
discipline of
Yes.
holding, the discipline of stillness, the
Mm.
discipline of letting go,
Mm.
especially when,
Mm.
to become a doctor, there's so much control, there's so
Mm. Mm.
focus, I do think, I think that it is an incredible untapped tool, yoga in general,
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly people
Yeah.
say, and I was always
Mm.
guilty of practicing the faster practices
Yes. Yeah.
because I
Hear
feel like
you.
I've done something then, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Mm.
simplicity, the stillness, like the
Mm.
discipline of yin, I think is much harder
Mm.
actually.
100%. And it's like we think we need that fast paced, and I do think that has a role, and sometimes we do, but to be able to come into stillness and with sensation, I think that's what the magic of yin is. Restorative is an incredible practice, but it's very much about propping to eliminate sensation and to make ourselves super comfortable and cozy and relaxed in that way. But yin is propping to create sensation, and that can be a real anchor, somatically. Like if I say I'm in a big heart opener and I've got all this sensation, yes, my mind is sitting with itself, but just to have that sensation as an anchor for it is incredibly helpful. And then the magic of rebound, when you release that shape and you get all this kind of energy within, I mean, TCM, the traditional Chinese medicine meridian system. I mean, you literally feel that, which is kind of magical, actually. That's the,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm a convert. I totally agree with you. I think it's incredible. And even in a restorative practice,
Mm.
staying in that bit between conscious awareness and
Mm.
like you're having
Yeah.
to focus. Well, there is a practice of remaining in a conscious state as opposed to drifting in.
Just sleep
Exactly.
time, yeah. And our brain sometimes wants to do that. Like it's one of the kind of escape mechanisms of the brain. And you see it a lot, like in yoga, in shavasana, that there'll always be someone snoring. And yes,
Yeah.
they're relaxed, but it's also the brain's way, I think, of just being like, oh, I need to go offline now. Like I've sat with a lot in the last, 45 minutes or hour of practice. But yeah, consciousness is something, yeah, feel like I'm beginning to explore the kind of, yeah, the layers.
So if I'm right, then because we talk a lot about equipping those that we serve, clinicians, practitioners, medical doctors, with the tools
Mhm.
for the impact, for the tools that they can use to create the impact that we need to see. You're advocating for the tools that are needed to put those
Mhm.
practitioners, those clinicians, those doctors in the best psychological state, to be
100%.
able to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, to be there, like to cultivate our well-being and our, to increase our capacity and our window of tolerance, because what is coming at us on the daily, is huge, and sometimes it's like a tidal wave of suffering. And how can we be there for that, and how can we sustain through that? And I truly believe it's through cultivating well-being and the relationship and connection with the self. And that the thing with that is that's going to be so different for everybody. So yin yoga is like, I mean, probably the amount of people that are actually going to, do that practice and be like, oh, this is for me for life. It is small because it's challenging and it's confronting and it's hard. But for many, it could be, I mean, it could be running, it could be a passion that you've enjoyed as a child that you've maybe become, you've set down, whether that's music or sport or, we can find this, ways to like feed our well-being in such a huge variety of ways. Like there's no one size fits all. And since I came across Laura's book 4 years ago, I designed a workshop that I've delivered about a dozen times within palliative care settings in Belfast. And it's, there's lots of ideas there, but it's very much about like, you will know, like when I ask the questions to people, they'll to get them to reflect on this, it'll all be so different. So it's not like you can hand someone a book or a guide, and I know this, of saying like here's how to look after yourself, because meditation, journaling, yoga is not for everyone, but that's not the only way. Like there's so many ways to cultivate this and nourish and nurture ourselves, so that we can then do the work. That really, yeah.
I have a question about, do you just, this is really just because I had with my brother the other day, but of the palliative care doctors, do you think it's predominantly men or women who are palliative care doctors?
Women. Not 100%, but like I don't know what the numbers are, but mostly, yeah.
And therapists, right? Predominantly women, right? I think it's predominantly women that work in these caring roles, predominantly women that and when you're talking about the kind of yoga or meditation or journaling, but you also then mentioned for me, what I heard was women, we don't have hobbies generally as women. In like men have hobbies, they
go
have
and play a round of golf and, yeah.
They generally, I was talking about it with my brother who has a load of hobbies, and he says, I keep telling my wife to go and find a hobby, and she's like, well, what hobby would I do? Women don't have hobbies, and hobbies are really brilliant at doing what I think what you're talking about, which is giving you the capacity to process stuff, reflect on stuff, giving you that mastery, which we all need to empower ourselves to say, oh, I can do this. I can get through it. I can be at this level and then achieve this level over a period of time.
Yeah.
Men in general don't have hobbies. And I think it's something that's really missing in our society. And I think that would really help. So this conversation has just made me reflect that to myself. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, what is the point during our lifespan where we often set the interests down? And I think for many women, it's that transition to motherhood. And yeah, the number of friends that I've said, like sending a yoga class on a Sunday morning, and they're like, oh no, my husband is going to play golf then, or he's got Gaelic, or he's got football or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but what about you? You're the one who's just given birth and is with your off maternity leave, and has your child 80% of the time. So I think that's a really interesting point, and that prioritization of others, like, is what women do. And yeah, it's possible, but it's not sustainable, I don't think. And we think that we're doing good a lot of the time by putting our interests down and increasing the amount of time that we're with our children or our family. And actually it's counterproductive, because the refreshment that you can get from heading out for a few hours, and I think one thing about the hobbies that you're mentioning, and it's connection with others, it's having conversations with others, or a shared interest, and to come back into like the domestic environment or the work environment, whenever you've had those experiences of connection, it's like disconnect to reconnect almost, isn't it? Yeah, really, really important. Not the whole answer, but definitely a huge part of it, I think.
How do we encourage people? Because, like you say, so you're working in the healthcare system and you are to try and get overworked doctors, overworked medical staff to kind of take that time and say, like, go and do some yoga or go and find a hobby or how do I know I'm from my own perspective who isn't working in healthcare but working in this space, just to find the time and
Yeah.
struggle and ever
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah. I think I'm a bit late to the game, but I'm only reading James Clear's Atomic Habits at the moment. I don't know if you've read it, and he talks about hooking things on, and I think I don't think actually this all takes a huge amount of time, but maybe we need to associate it with something that we're doing anyway. And whether that's like, for example, I live quite far away from Belfast, like maybe a 45-minute drive, but what I do is park the car about 20 minutes away and then run in the morning. And yes, like, I mean, that only takes me another 20 minutes, maybe getting changed and stuff about half an hour, but doing that on the way in and the way home, like that's my kind of physical exercise. Again, running's not for everybody, but if you park 15 minutes away, so it's not like about necessarily finding the an hour a day, but it's like how to weave things into regular life. And I think certainly, like, I've just actually finished, or I'm nearly finished writing a chapter for funny about Oxford. It's the Oxford Handbook of Palliative Care, about self-care for health professionals. And I did a little section on, like, creating habits and intentions for our day, and all this kind of work. And it just sort of came to me like, what is my screen time? And what if I swapped like 10% of that screen time for some of this work, like a daily practice to center myself, get an intention for the day. And I mean, yeah, embarrassingly, my screen time is about 3 to 4 hours a day. And yes, that is, some of it's work and, a lot of it's communication. But, if that, like 10% of that, I think I worked out is about 20 minutes. And so, yeah, I think we are, as we all know, in this age of distraction. And, we think, we need to relax, and we get so overwhelmed that we think that like a glass of wine and Netflix is what we need. But like all of that's good in moderation. But I do think that we are overworked. There is a huge intensity in our work, but whatever that does to us, we get to a point of overwhelm, and we think that like the wine and the Netflix is like almost, and the screen time, the scrolling, it's like we go into that dorsal vagal kind of part of our nervous system, and that feels like what we need. But yes, in moderation, but I do think we need to swap some of that time for stuff that truly nurtures us, and that will be so different for everybody. But I think time is a bit like money as well, where we think like, oh, there's no time, there's no money, but it's about looking at it, taking a little bit of time to do an inventory, and what are our values and where do we want to focus our energy, because that is something like that we do have a capacity to alter our lives. And it does, I think we can get into such a rhythm and such a pattern of this is what I do, but now and again stepping back and saying like, is this really working for me? Can I weave
I think
something
that's
else?
so profound, and such an important insight from someone who's seeing people at the end of their lives where the time is up, you know?
Yeah.
it's so easy. I'm sure many of our listeners, I know I am just nodding in vehement agreement, like listening to, it's so easy to drop into that pattern that's been fed to us as like normal and expected. You know, at the by life stage, there's all sorts of um, expectations placed on us by virtue of what we're fed in those that keep us in that state.
I'm also thinking, like, 'cause when you say a glass of wine and Netflix, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really nice. A glass of wine and Netflix. But I'm trying to think, what would I do? And this is the problem with this hobby, the lack of hobbies. What do I want to do that's going to it's going to nurture and nourish me? I can't think of anything. All I need to think
And
of,
like what
I was thinking I'd just go to sleep a bit earlier. That would be nice. That would be
yeah, but it's things like my mum goes, but only since she retired, she sings. Or she goes like I mean my yoga practice, I have a consistent and
I
strong
get
practice.
it. I know there are things, but I'm just saying I can't think myself of something I would enjoy. I know that you could go to the choir, I could swim, I could do that, but
Yeah.
I just don't enjoy any of that.
Yeah.
Cooking?
What did you enjoy as a child?
That's maybe not a good place.
Like a teenager, like as in like, was there like an after school thing or a weekend thing or anything that kind of like when, to kind of that made you feel alive when you were younger? Is there anything that pops up in that?
Taking drugs and being a massive big one. Yeah, like, I mean, there wasn't. I've got a pretty
Yeah.
messed up childhood. I think
Yeah, fair enough. Fair
that's
enough.
the problem. So
Yeah.
I don't. I think maybe I'm just an anomaly. I have got that, but I need to find it. I do think, but that was my thing, right, from a very young age.
Food is your thing now. You enjoy
Food. Yeah.
I love eating. Yeah. I like eating. Don't like cooking though.
Cooking. No, I was gonna say cooking.
Yeah, maybe I could. I reckon I probably could like cooking if I tried it.
Yeah. And I think like, or, what about like around exercise? Like, is there, because some people,
Walking. I love walking, but I
yeah,
like walking for the exercise. I've got a dog specifically, so it makes me walk,
yeah,
So I know the importance. It's like I work in this space. I know the importance of
yeah,
moving my body. I do quite like cold water exposure, and I probably think that's the only hobby I think if I could find a group that I could regularly go to do that, I would go to swim in a river probably a couple of times a week. I can see myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's it. It's like tapping into things that you're a little bit curious about, or you kind of think like, oh, maybe that. And like I know over COVID, the cold water swimming thing, like it was huge, and people are still doing it in groups, and you've got connection, and you've got like all the physiological changes that you get with the cold exposure. And I think the thing is like we have this energy, right, like pent up inside us no matter what work we do, but especially if we're working with trauma, like it's going to impact us. It's the paint that's splattering on us. And moving that through. And some people find moving it through with really sedate, like crafting, and like you're saying, I mean, singing, and that's their vibe. And then others, it's like hit and like, up at 5 a.m. and like going to circuits, and there's like such a huge variety. Like but it is a really, I think it's it can be a challenge. Like I think you're illustrating that, Araminta, like really well. That it's like, yeah, but what? And I wonder if it is curiosity and trying different things, and it can feel a bit clunky. I think initially when we're in that phase of like, I don't know what my thing is. But is it, looking through different events, classes, like seeing what you're drawn to, like, and yourself, and
It is, I think, going back to looking at childhood, because for me, my everything as you're talking, I'm saying my thing that I'm drawn to will be the extreme. So I'm like, I not jump out of planes. Not really. I don't like heights, but maybe. But I think surfing is something I would like to do. Can't do it very easily here, but I can imagine surfing would be anything that would give me that big shot of adrenaline.
Does. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
thought of
Mhm.
my youth behavior.
Yes.
It could be the thing that I think would keep me interested and yeah, into it. Like, and I
Yeah.
guess cold water swimming is that same. It's that adrenaline buzz, isn't it? It's that
Mhm.
rush.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
So I'm conscious of time, so I'm thinking that I'm going to
Yeah.
ask the question that we ask all our podcasts,
Oh yeah.
which is we live in a climate of fear and anxiety and doubt, and if you look at a macro level, whether that's the geopolitical, the climatic, all the tension that happens at that level,
Yeah.
down to the individual, as you've so eloquently described during the course of our conversation, and how we treat our relationships with ourselves so that we can be present and available in the context of our immediate circle and our professional capacity. So against that backdrop of lots of difficulty, if there was one lever for change, one button you could push that would affect the kind of change that we need to see in the world, what would that be?
I think it's our capacity to be present, because I think that people who are present within themselves, in their body, in their lived experience, make good decisions, make compassionate decisions, make wise decisions. We see our humanity when we're present. It's when we're distracted, when we're disconnected, that we lose that. And that's when really, dangerous things can occur. But I truly believe if we can find ways, and again, it will be different. I mean, there's the huge wisdom from spiritual traditions, but there's not just one way to cultivate presence. Uh, that could make, yeah, a huge difference. And again, from the micro to the macro, like you're describing, um, with ourselves, presence with ourselves. I mean, um, that is the key. I think if we can, like I described, on that course that I went to, it isn't there isn't a list of things, the perfect way to do something. You can't teach that, but if you can teach someone how to become present within themselves, then it'll all flow from there, and it will all be flowing from a place of wisdom. And yeah, I think that would be the button that I would love to press. Uh, and
It's
yeah.
interesting reflecting on that observation.
Mm.
Like the great teachers that you had, the great work colleagues that you've partnered with, are the ones that can cultivate that sense of true presence, who feel
Possible.
absolutely. And I'm just coming off the back of a weekend where my mum's been in hospital, and the difference in the medical staff, those that are showing up present, making eye contact. We call it bedside manner, but it's so much more. It's understanding your nervous system's impact on the person that you're in front of.
Yes.
And cultivating a true connection in that moment of trust, of like, and I think I think it's, if everybody could be more present, be more
100%.
their lived experience, because it's so hard. I mean, even now we're on this call, devices distracting in the back. It doesn't matter how much you think you've turned off. It's very hard to cultivate that. But actually, there are tools, there are means, and there are ways. I just think that's such a beautiful answer. We get lots of very profound and inspiring answers to that question that is full of hope for humanity and but I think that's a really simple, actionable piece around cultivate presence. And I'm also really keen to implement that, Minter, with our team and our business, because I think that's it. It's a really valuable, makes people feel valued and seen and understood. If you are truly present and holding this, it's like that safe container, isn't it, for exploration? So
Yeah, 100%. I think you're exactly right, Emma, about like it's normalized now that we're pulled in so many different directions. We're so distracted. Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. It's like we just think this is normal now, and that it doesn't have to be that way. We can push against this tide, and I think it's presence is free. It's not like this expensive resource that is exclusive to a privileged few. It's something that can be taught and nurtured with everybody. And that isn't to say though that access to this, that you might say like it's a lot more challenging um for certain people, but I truly believe that I think it's the thing that can really make a difference. And that, as you said, so sorry, Araminta. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but I just think
No.
it can be challenging for different people. And I was kind of linking back to Emma, what Emma said, wanting to implement it in our workspace. And for me, that's
Mhm.
could be a big challenge because I'm neurodiverse. So
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
ADHD, for me, I will struggle to be present all the time. If we had a 3-hour meeting or even an hour meeting or 45
Mhm.
struggle for me, like I do struggle to stay present in that time. So I can what the world needs to understand, I guess, is in order to do that, perhaps cultivate 15 minutes of we're gonna have 15 minutes presence, in a meeting
Mhm.
that everyone has to, I don't know, somehow to make it possible for the neurodiverse people to be able to not feel I can't do this. I actually can't be part of this, you know,
Yeah.
whatever culture thing you're trying to cultivate, because I wouldn't be able to sit and be present for hours.
But that's
No.
exactly what Rosie's advocating for, is an individual appropriate approach to presence. Like understanding yourself enough to be able to, because the thing is, it's the neural pathways. I mean, I, c- I can be consciously present, but sometimes the subconscious, do you know what I mean? Sometimes like the environment takes over. And that neural pathway is really strong. When my kids come in, hi kids, yeah, kiss, love you.
Mhm.
Oh, just gonna go back and go to work. So it's how do we that's a learned behavior. What's stopping me from just instead of doing that, stopping for 30 seconds and being present for 30 seconds with Ophelia, or just and then going back and being really present with the work. So I think it's a really interesting, it's definitely made me think, and I'm kind of, I know that I'll reflect this evening as I'm going about brushing my teeth. I'll be thinking about presence and,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Little triggers as well, that like you might need our mentor like every 15 minutes, like to walk outside, like to get or go and make a cup of tea, or but triggers for, I mean, we call it mindfulness as well, like clinically we often wash our hands. So I kind of talk about in the workshop, could that be a trigger when you wash your hands, just to be like, okay, like take a breath, how am I feeling? You've probably just finished an interaction. It's the weaving in, and it's not easy, by the way. Like, whenever I say it, it sounds so simple. Just be present, like it'll change the world. I mean, the reason that the world is the way it is because it is really hard, and it's even harder than it's ever been. I mean, we used to wait in line, we're of the generation like who remember pre-smartphones, and yeah, you would wait in line and you would twiddle your thumbs, and maybe you'd notice the trees and the sun, but now we don't need to do that because we've got our screens and a quick scroll. And I'm as guilty as anyone, even at the minute when I walk around the hospital, because I have to walk between different wards a lot, and I'm like, I've made a new rule with myself to not look at my smartphone in between, and it's so hard. Like, it's so hard. The dopamine hit that we're getting from that is so enticing. So yeah, it's a constant practice, and it's not something we're going to arrive at. It's something that we just need to keep circling back to and learning more and more, and learning ourselves more and more. How do we be present? That is, yeah, it's
Right.
huge.
It's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank
It's
you.
really
Very
fun.
Right.
You're so welcome.
It's been fascinating. Very lots of food for thought, really.
Yeah,
So much.
it's been really fun. Thank you very much.